All right, today we're tackling the absolutely wild story of the NBA's only Canadian team, the Toronto Raptors. I mean, this is a journey that's improbable, sometimes a little heartbreaking, but ultimately, it's a huge triumph. We're talking about a team that went from basically a pop culture punchline to the very, very top of the basketball world.
And you know what? Let's just start right at the peak. Because in 2019, the Raptors did something that a lot of people, well, they thought it was impossible. They went all the way and won the NBA championship. This wasn't just a win, it cemented their place in history, and it literally united an entire nation behind them. Just incredible.
But here's the thing. That championship didn't just happen overnight. No way. It was the culmination of decades of building, a ton of heartbreak, and just one massive franchise-altering gamble. So you gotta ask yourself, how on earth did a team named after a movie dinosaur become the kings of the NBA? Okay, so to really understand the glory of that 2019 win, we've got to rewind. We're gonna go way back to their very quirky, very 90s beginnings. This is the story of how a team went from being kind of an expansion afterthought to a true league powerhouse.
So, let's set the scene. It's 1995. The NBA decides it's time to expand north of the border. They create two Canadian teams, the Vancouver Grizzlies, and of course, a new franchise in Toronto. And believe it or not, this was the first time pro basketball was back in the city since the Toronto Huskies folded after just one season, all the way back in 1947. Yeah, it had been a while.
Now the naming process, oh man, it was something else. You can't make this stuff up. They held a nationwide contest, and these were the finalists. I mean, look at this list. Beavers, hogs, tarantulas. Seriously, they could have been the Toronto Hogs. But, as fate would have it, the huge popularity of a little movie called Jurassic Park kind of tipped the scales. And so on May 15th, 1994, the Toronto Raptors were officially born. So as you'd probably expect, those early days were, well, they were rough. The team was young, they were inexperienced, and they were trying to find their footing in a league full of established giants. They wrapped up their very first season with a 21-61 record. I mean, that's a classic expansion team struggle, right? But then, everything changed. See, in 1998, the Raptors drafted this high-flying guard named Vince Carter, and he was the absolute turning point. And listen, Carter wasn't just a star, he was a global phenomenon. His dunks were just out of this world. He put on one of the most iconic slam dunk contest performances ever, and it created this whole cultural movement they called Vinsanity. He pretty much single-handedly made the Raptors a team you had to watch. And with Vince leading the charge, the franchise started hitting some huge milestones. They made their first ever playoff appearance in 2000. Then, in 2001, they won their first playoff series. They even got to the Eastern Conference semifinals where they lost a legendary Game 7 by a single shot. It was heartbreaking for sure, but the message was clear. The Raptors were finally legitimate contenders. But, of course, things change. After Vince eventually left in 2004, the team kind of entered this long wilderness period. It's like they were lost in the woods for a bit. They weren't the new kids on the block anymore, but they hadn't really figured out a sustainable winning identity yet. It was just an era of searching and a lot of rebuilding. So the mantle of leadership, it passed through a few different hands. After Vince, you had the all-star big man Chris Bosh become the face of the franchise. And when he left in 2010, yep, you guessed it, another rebuild began. This one, though, eventually led to the rise of a truly beloved backcourt duo, DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. And that era, the DeRozan and Lowry era, man, it was defined by one thing: amazing regular seasons followed by crushing playoff heartbreak. They were winning division titles, setting franchise records for wins. They were a constant in the playoffs. But every single year, it felt like they'd run into this brick wall, a wall often named LeBron James, and they'd fall short of that ultimate goal. It was just brutal for the fans. So after another one of those disappointing playoff exits in 2018, the team's president, Masai Ujiri, he had a massive choice to make. Does he keep this beloved core together and just hope for a different result next time? Or does he make a ruthless, super high-risk move to finally break the cycle? Well, he chose the latter. In the summer of 2018, Masai Ujiri pulled the trigger on a trade that absolutely shocked the entire NBA world, and it sent a crystal clear message. Just being good wasn't good enough anymore.
They traded DeMar DeRozan. Think about that. This was a player who had famously declared, "I am Toronto." He was the franchise, and they traded him for Kawhi Leonard. Now, Kawhi was an elite talent, no doubt, a former Finals MVP. But he was coming off a major injury, and here's the kicker. He could just walk away as a free agent after only one season. It was the definition of an all-or-nothing, push-all-your-chips-in gamble. It was so audacious, it actually changed how other teams thought about building a championship contender.
And guess what? The gamble paid off. Big time. Kawhi Leonard went on to have one of the greatest individual playoff runs in the history of the NBA. He led the Raptors through an absolute gauntlet of tough opponents. He was the final piece of the puzzle. That high-stakes bet, it returned the ultimate prize, an NBA championship. You know, that championship run really cemented the Raptors' legacy, not just in the city of Toronto, but across the entire country. So let's talk about that. What does that legacy look like now, and what's next for Canada's team? Okay, obviously, the championship is the crown jewel. But if you look beyond the trophies, their most unique legacy is their status as Canada's team. It's something really special. Ever since the Vancouver Grizzlies moved to Memphis back in 2001, the Raptors have been the only NBA team representing a whole country. That creates a fan base that literally stretches from coast to coast. But, you know, as quickly as that championship team came together, it started to break apart. It was like lightning in a bottle. Kawhi Leonard left in free agency that very same summer. Then, over the next few years, the rest of that championship core moved on. And that ushered in a brand new era of rebuilding, this time centered around a really promising young star named Scottie Barnes. And that really leaves us with a big question for the future, doesn't it? The Raptors have tasted that ultimate success, and they got there by taking a huge risk. So now, as they build around this new young core led by Scottie Barnes, you have to wonder, can the North rise again? Can the unlikely Kings find their way back to the top of the mountain? I guess only time will tell.